In the British general or parliamentary election of October the 15th, 1964, there was a notably tight struggle between the ruling Conservatives led by Prime Minister Sir Alec Douglas-Home and the opposition Labourites led by Harold Wilson, who in February 1963 had been chosen to lead the party after the sudden death of Hugh Gaitskell in January 1963. On the one hand, during the 13 years of Conservative rule since 1951, Britain had prospered materially, and so had most British people. The unemployment rate was only around maybe 2 or 3%, so much lower than it proved to be, especially in the early 1990s economic recession. The inflation rates were generally speaking low. Many new schools were built, and generally speaking, there was an air of dynamism still in the British society and economy. And of course, the baby boomers increased enrollment at many schools, both public and private ones. On the other hand, there was a growing disillusionment with the government, which is typical in even the Western parliamentary democracies. After the government, especially after the same party has been in power for over 10 years, there is usually a notable disillusionment with it, and this disillusionment then had built up gradually. On the other hand, Prime Minister Douglas-Home was, according to I think Ian Gilmore, a fellow Conservative, a truly nice man. He was charming, and in many ways he represented, according to a British historian, the old ruling class at its best. And he tried not to excuse me, return insults for insults. When Harold Wilson, who was noted for his sharp tongue and biting wit, claimed exaggeratedly that the long democratic progress of Britain had supposedly ground to a halt with the 14th Earl. Incidentally, Sir Alec Douglas-Home happened to be the 14th Earl of Home, although he had renounced his membership in the House of Lords in order to take his seat in the House of Commons. Prime Minister Douglas-Home simply replied, "Well, I suppose when one comes to think of it, perhaps Mr. Wilson is the 14th Mr. Wilson." Despite the fact that Wilson was much wittier and much more charismatic, at least back in the early and mid 1960s, and even for a portion of the late 1960s, than Douglas-Home, and that Douglas-Home made the mistake of abolishing the retail price mechanism, and he was clearly more interested in and more capable of dealing with foreign affairs than domestic affairs, and he was totally uncharismatic despite his charm because of his nice and polite behavior. Still, the Labour Party did not get a massive victory in October 1964. According to the Gallup poll taken in October 1963, when Alec Douglas-Home had become the British Prime Minister, the Labourites had been 12% ahead of the Conservatives. However, on election day, they were just 0.7% ahead, with 44.1% of the vote compared to the Conservatives' 43.4% of the vote. And this time, even the usual majority bonus produced by the first past the post or single member plurality electoral system, where each constituency or electoral district is represented by the candidate who has taken the largest number of votes there, even if it has not constituted a majority. This time, even this majority bonus did not really emerge, because even in terms of seats, the election was remarkably close. The Laborites took only 317 seats. In other words, they had an overall majority of just 4 seats in the 630-seat House of Commons. The Conservatives took 304 seats, and the Liberals, whose vote rose dramatically to 11.2%, took 9 seats. Accordingly, Harold Wilson formed a majority Labour government, but virtually no one in Britain expected this government to last for the full 4 or 5 years of the parliamentary term. And they were right.